Hey, how y'all doing? Okay, let's do it to it. All right, we're gonna be going into another game. We're into target consciousness and reassess your chess, fourth edition. So, all right, I have to put the name in, so bear with me just for 1 second. Just gotta take 1 second to get everything set up there. Let me see, make sure I have it all. So I want to make sure the name's right so that if you ever wanted to look it up, it's 100% spot on there. Perfect. It looks good to me. The Calcutta. There you go. Yep, perfect. Thank you for your patience on that. Sometimes it takes a little longer, but that time it's pretty efficient to get it in. So we're going to learn about target consciousness here. So Jeremy Stillman came up with that name because his students were having problems. They were only going for kingside hunts rather than playing for weaknesses in the position. They would just be always going for the attack and not ever looking for weakness like weak pawns and stuff like that. This is the Petrov, which is one of Fabi's favorite openings. It's an interesting position for sure. There's a wait a second, is that right? Oh, he moved back. There's this line was actually played, I believe, in a game that Fabi played against Magnus. And Magnus, it was at St. Louis, and it kind of this position was what Magnus had, and he had I forgot the move order that he had, but he had some like special move after I think Fabi played here, and then there was like a unique move of Bishop C5, and that the whole idea behind Bishop C5 here was to stop Black's most active square for the bishop is right there. This is the best because it's protected by a pawn, and the only reason that this was kind of not such a good move was they were concerned about the knight coming into a5 and attacking the bishop, and kind of that's kind of why the bishop usually develops to for white usually develops not there, right here, usually develops there, and then you castle. But Magnus had played a new move, and so this was kind of one of the moves that shocked a lot when Fabi was played. And he had to think about it for a second, and I believe he, at that point, if I'm not mistaken, I think he played Bishop E7. And then Magnus Castle, and I think Fabi Castle, and then they went into this line. See, the whole reason behind this move too is I just remembered. What happens is Black wants to play Bishop here, Queen here, and then Castle Kingside, Queenside, and then White because what Castle and Queenside here would not be a good idea for Magnus's pieces, and so the idea is opposite side castling allows for pawn storms to happen, and so bishop c4 stops that idea because the bishop was to go to e6 and then develop the queen, and then of course castle queenside, and the reason that you want to castle queenside is this pawn chain here, this here, isn't really much of a threat to this pawn chain for Black. But that's on a different subject, and so that's kind of more of an advanced part, but I just wanted to share some of that cool knowledge of the Petrov. Okay, so black just decided to retreat out. And then now d4, bishop e7, bishop d3, castles, h3 here, knight a6, a3, and then c5. Wait a second, did I make a mistake? Let me see. No, there. Ah, gotcha. Castle, kingside. There you go. White for white. Knight c7. See, it's kind of interesting. You're kind of getting to see the pattern of when c4 5 is played, the knight can always slip back into c7, and that's kind of an idea. Okay, rook e1, rook e8. This allows for the protection of the bishop. Bishop f4, knight e6. This attacks the bishop. Bishop h2. It's really an interesting position. This is kind of the only problem with the bishop coming back to h2 is this knight would love to play in like that, come here and there. This bishop claws it up. I know what you're thinking. Why doesn't the bishop just come here? Well, there's one problem. Knight to h5. And then now if the bishop retreats back, you have knight hf4, and it's not bad, but it's not one of the best continuations. And you also potentially even have this. You don't actually, you probably wouldn't want to take there. That's probably the best. Yeah, this would be an interesting position to analyze, but that's why h2 is, there's always a drawback to moves. That's h2, bishop to h2 is the drawback. The knight can't get in there. C takes d. Knight b5. Oh, not g5. Knight b5. That takes scope twice on this pawn here. It's defended twice, so it's defended twice, so it takes scope on that pawn. Queen b6. Knight b takes d4. Knight takes. Knight takes. And then bishop d7 here. Now the rooks are connected. And then queen d2. The rooks are connected too. So both sides are ready. You gotta always be on guard when there's a pawn that is given to you, because you gotta say to yourself, why is my opponent giving me this pawn? Bishop f8 was played, but the problem is we had to take a look at this. Why is this a bad idea? Because of the trapping of the queen. The queen's trapped here. But you're saying, wait a second, can't you just win a knight? Yeah, you can win a knight, but at what cost? Boom. And then after king takes, the queen falls. So this is a tactical idea that actually this queen d2 indirectly protects b2 from the black queen because of that line and loss of the queen. It's not worth two bishops and a knight and a pawn for that. Actually, it's just two bishops, a bishop and a knight, because black wins the pawn back on h7. So this is what we looked at. Now we got to look at this and say, black has a rather joyless position, basically an unfun position. This is a lady. She has an isolated pawn on an open file and can't even boast of any compensation via active pieces, since her whole army looks more than paralyzed almost. It's like the isolated pawn has nothing to do. There's no compensation. Let's just say, if maybe it was on d5, there might be a little bit, or d4, there might be some sort of compensation, but d6 really, it's not really doing anything for the position. At the moment, black's most active piece is her queen, so white trades it by playing this move. White says, "Hey, you only have one active piece. Let's give it a go." So rook takes, and then knight d5. No better is queen takes is no better, because then takes, and then d5. c3, and black remains passive and still under pressure. And remember the idea, there is still a potential pin here. So like, even if these three pieces get traded off, these here for these, and then you get a rook here, this king, even though there's two defenders, there's potentially an idea of b3 and c4, and you have some sort of back rank problems. So you have to always be on the lookout for that type of working. And so knight takes, queen takes, and then knight takes b6. A takes isn't playable here due to bishop e4, bishop e4. Winnings, because then you'd have to play bishop c6, and knight takes, and b takes, and c4, and then after the knight retreats, bam, there goes a pawn off the board, and see you later, alligator. And then rook e8 doesn't work because rook e2, knight c7, and then bishop takes what am I missing here? Oh, I got it. That's a wrong move on my part. This is what they're talking about. e2, knight, bishop takes, and you're still winning a pawn here. That's the idea. And then b3. Remember when we were going over the anti-knight pawn moves? This is an anti-knight pawn move because it stops these squares from falling into black's hands. It also prepares for a lockdown with c4, and this would be a pretty devastating position, and white would be dominating on the queen side. And then, as Alekhine had mastered, he could play on both sides of the board, so that's kind of what's going on here potentially. A nice move that takes a4 and c4 squares away from the knight, while also preparing a3 to a4, turning the pawn into an active participant in the battle. So there's these moves that could be played. So d5, that stops c4 from being played, so there's a4. Now Now this really shut down everything for black. Bishop b. Let's see, a4, bishop b4, right here. That it did give a spot for the bishop, but rook d1, and now there should be a lot of pressure built up around d5. g3. Try to get some back rank, give some air to the king. Bishop f4. This gives a spot for the king to flee to as well. King f8, and then knight e2. And the idea is potentially the bishop could actually retreat back, or retreat over here, and then this knight will plop in there and start attacking here. Mainly the bishop probably would go to e3, and then the knight would want to come into f4 and attack the pawn. And then this bishop would just retreat back, and you'd have just way too much potential energy, and you wouldn't want that to happen. So knight e2. White plan is to simply but effectively be White's plan is simple but effective. He tends to follow up with bishop e3, like what we just said, eyeing black's knight, and if the knight goes to a7 followed by knight f4, we just talked about that, then b5 becomes the begins to feel some heat. b5 does. So we just talked about that without even looking at the book. So that's good. We're doing great. You're improving. The more you can do without looking, and kind of being able to assimilate. Jeremy Silman, when he's talked about reassess your chess and target consciousness, you'll improve dramatically that way. Excuse me. Knight c8. Of course, you see the idea. Black wants to cement his knight to e7, or she does, and then play to protect his pawn here. That's the idea, to protect that pawn. So knight f4, and then knight e7, and now c4 gets put on the board, exclam for white. More unusual is the kind of in this kind of position is bishop e2 to f3 is intending the pressure against, to put more pressure against d5. However, this proves unnecessary since c5 makes use of more tactical nuisance to activate forces and win material. Tactical nuisance to actually force the win of material. Sorry, I read that wrong. It's actually force the win of material. This does here. Rook d8. See, the interesting thing is if this is played here, the knight can actually come in and check, pawn takes, and then bishop takes, and then the king would actually have to come up here, and then rook would slide up to d7, and then this rook would come, and I think that would happen. So basically b5 b6 is forced. I'm wondering what, I just want to see what is amiss here? I'm thinking that the first move is correct, so that's correct. Takes. Okay, there takes. Okay, knight here. What if bishop takes? Okay. Knight there. Bishop takes, pawn takes. And so you're actually up material. Yeah. Wow, that is a tremendous tactical position for sure. So this is actually what Jeremy Silman was saying. King F7. Rook D7, so we have that. Black is quite lost. If this is played, okay, so you basically just activate your king at that point. Okay, gotcha. So bishop e4 here, because you're actually using a pin. Stronger is this move, c takes, d5. That's what Jeremy Silman's saying. Then bishop f5. Bishop takes, knight takes. Bishop takes a2. With 2 extra pawns for white. Yeah, this is much, much, much stronger. But I think the reason that the bishop wanted to move there was they wanted to, I think, have more defense on the pawn. I'm kind of actually stumped by that too as well. There's actually knight takes d5 here. And then bishop oh, my bad, that's not right. It's takes here, knight takes, oh, then bishop e4. Okay, gotcha. That's the winning move. Okay, so bishop d6, b6, and then ending the threat of a2, so b6 makes more sense at this point. I think the idea that they were struggling with is what happens after here. It takes, and I really don't think black has much, so this was kind of a mistake. So knight takes d5, and black's isolated pawn has fallen. The rest of the game is off theme, so we'll just take a look a little bit. Takes, c takes, f5, bishop f3, and then bishop f7. Kind of interesting if you come back here, you take there, you take there. I'm liking this move here. I know it's kind of interesting. I think that wins. I'm just trying to figure out, doesn't that just win on the spot? Oh, I I see why. Ah, tactical trick. Very tactical trick. He takes here, rotates there. But still, I don't think it's winnable. Even if you bring a king up here, I don't see it. Here, cement there. I don't see it. I still think it's still winnable, even in that scenario. No. This is still winnable. That's the tactic, though. This little sneaky trick. Actually, hold on. That's the tactic. Oh, ouch. I was altogether wrong. This is a mistake. That's why that doesn't work. No, this is actually a mistake before. So that has to be a tactic. This actually loses bishop b4. Now that I think about it, the tactic is h2. So here. The pawn has to, I don't know how it could be defended. No, can't even play there. If you played here, this bishop would just take there, and even if the king got this, these two connectors is just way too powerful. You can even do some checks here. If the king moves there, you can get this pawn rolling, and if that happens there, if this, you play bishop here, then you get your bishops involved to guard this diagonal, and you start these two pawn moves, and even if you can't even win this pawn. So bishop here, and this is cut off, so there's really no way to get to the bishop. So in theory, you could potentially, I think instead of bishop d7, I like ace a6, and then here, then push, and then if you played there, check. Even if you blundered at that point, you're still winning even with that blunder. That has to happen in a game, set, match. Yeah, I see kinda. There has to be a reason why. I have to see what is the tactical motif here. Oh, you take there, okay. Okay. Gotta love these type of game positions. Bishop takes a7. Rook f8. Bishop d4. g5. Bishop b3. h6. Rook c1. Rook d8. Bishop c5. King e7. Bishop takes. King takes, and then b4. Bishop takes d5 is actually a double question mark blunder. At this point, bishop takes, and then king takes, and thus far it's over. Isolated d-pawn, but our anti-isolated d-pawn rule also applies to other types of isolated pawns. Okay, we're going to we're going to set up a position. Let me get a sip here. Come on. Clear the board. Okay, let's make sure we have this right. Okay, perfect. Just give me a second to put in the players. Okay. Black's pawn on c6 is begging to be attacked by white's heavy pieces. While his other isolated pawn on a6, though not on an open file, also earns a greedy stare from white. What he means is white needs to look at both of those because those are both isolated. Those are targets. So you kind of got a heavy piece that could come over here. You have a bishop that could, queen that come up there. There's a whole bunch of stuff that could happen. Knight takes d7. Following our rule about exchanging off minor pieces, now the b6 and c squares can be safely used by the rook and queen. So queen takes, and queen c2. Rook a b1 is actually a mistake in this scenario. It wasn't wise to leave a6 undefended, unattended to. More sensible move would have been actually bringing the other rook over. Though black's poor pawn structure would, as usually, leave him with very unhappy defensive chores. So black, doesn't matter, black would still be in an unhappy position. So either way, queen c4, you have a double attack here now, and the other piece could be coming. I'm immediately taking aim at the a pawn. a5, queen c5 here, now taking aim there, and again there. Queen c7, protecting. And then rook to b5. My bad there. I'm sorry about this. It's this move here. Yikesies. I put it on the wrong spot. I knew there was a problematic problem here. Yeah, best is actually FB8. That's what the move was. So Queen C4 immediately taking advantage of that. A5, Queen there, Queen C5. He's not giving the A5 a break. A5 pawn, Queen here. And now rook to b5 exclam. Now this makes more sense. The queen is undefended, and the idea about if takes here, pawn takes, and if rook, then remember what happens? We get this wonderful position, and then we're gonna basically be winning a pawn pretty soon. This is the kind of unrelenting assault against weak pawns that makes target consciousness a very fun and pleasant experience for the player who knows how to actually do it. Like rook a8 now is played here. Queen c3. We're double attacking here, potentially getting another rook involved. White had many good moves here. He chose to make room for on c5 for the bishop on b5. Rook f to c8, and then rook to c5. e6, rook c1. Absolutely delicious. Black, who is tied down to a5, and c6 is completely helpless here. Rook a6, and then h5 or h4. Since black can only sit around passively and hope his opponent doesn't find a breakthrough, white patiently improves his game before initiating the coup de grace attack. H5, rook b1, rook a8, g3, rook a6, and then king g2. If you have the luxury of endless time, then creating an optimum king safety is always a good idea. Queen a7. A mistake that hastens the end. More resistance could have been rook c to a8, though it's hard to imagine black actually saving such a, he says, miserable position. One possible line is also rook c8 there, queen to c4, queen c8, rook b, b5, rook a7, and then bishop, queen b3. The way white mixes attack against a mixes attack against a5 and c6 and infiltration threat down the b file is quite picturific. What that means is perfect. So rook a8 to stop this move here. That's why this move was played, is to stop that move. And then rook b7. We just infiltrate in. Rook a6 to a7. Rook takes. Rook takes. Queen c3. Queen d8. And then d5 exclam. Rook takes c is good, but then there's queen d5 check, giving black more counterplay than he deserves. So d5 actually shuts out counterplay. Exclam. Takes a moment to silent any counterplay. E takes d, and now you can take here. Rook a8, queen to c5, rook b8, rook d6 to win the pawn. Queen e8, queen takes d5. Eventually they would lose. Note that queen takes what is that? I'll go back here. Let me make sure I have all this. Okay. Oh, I got it. Queen takes here is a mistake. This is the double question mark blender here. Then rook takes. Instantly wins after takes. Boom is mate. Okay, got it. Had to make sure that I knew what was going on here. So bishop, queen, a7, rook bb5. Oops, wrong one. bb5, there we go. Exclam. King h7. Of course, you see that if takes here, takes, king up, and then pawn takes, and this passed pawn is going to be a problem. Check. And then the whole house falls down. Okay. Ha, you gotta love that. White has an extra pawn and still remains under heavy and still retains heavy pressure against C. The rest of the game was easy. Queen B1, Queen C2, Queen takes, Rook takes, Rook A8, Rook A2. Remember, you get pass pawn, a rook behind the pass pawn, and it must be pushed. Remember, you always gotta think about that there. A6, King F3, King F6, King F4, King E7, King. Oops, that was E4. King G5, E5 takes, and then C5. King F4, C4, King E4, and then he resigned because there's no way to the white pawn will catch the black king will catch the white king will catch the black C pawn. A little tongue tied there. Let's see if we. Yeah, we'll probably save this one, but we'll read about it before I say do, because there's a longer game. This is called backward. This is the subsection inside of Target Consciousness, part 5, backward pawns. The backward pawn shares more of the same shortcoming as an isolated pawn, and several of the anti-isolated pawn ideas also apply to this weak little critter. Hey, how you doing? Of course, the superior side needs to make sure that the backward pawn remains backward. But once this is done, then we see the old friend like trade the minor pieces, pile up with the rook and queen the same way, rear and then rear the and rears the like tiger like. We may do this one. I changed my mind because this looks like a fun one. I want to see how he handles backward pawn. So let's do it to it. This is the Jeremy Silman game. Let me make sure I have this right. Well, this isn't a Jeremy Silman game. Sorry, this is a different. He found a game that kind of represents this. Okay, let's do it to it. Oops, come on. Kind of a really different position to say the least. that's interesting. It did surrender a outpost, so c5. Of course, you see that this is kind of a mistake as well, because now the bishop is trapped. This one c5 move traps the bishop, so the bishop has to actually give itself up for 3 pawns. And then there's still, it's just not, there's not enough compensation for the loss of the bishop. You can even just implant a bishop there and none of the pawns are moving, not one pawn. Well, see, remember, material is, I know this sounds funny, material is a relative word, because position, giving up some material for a positional win, or an advantage that you can basically, as I like to say, nurture all the way through to the very end, could even win. You could even be down a pawn and still win if you have a superior position. So yes, equal material is in play, but I don't really think that black can really make use of it. Like, you just bring your king in here, you can start your rook onslaught. It's going to be hard for white to break through, but there is more potential for that. So c5. So that's kind of why a6 was played and not the bishop takes. Let's see, where are we at? I gotta make sure I'm in the right spot. 16. Okay. Bishop c7. Queen c2. Queen f6. Rook a e1. Remember, the grandmasters and masters understand that you don't ever relieve the tension right away. And I know most of us would think after this move, let's just trade down, right? The problem is, now do you see the backward pawn? That's the backward pawn for us. And so now we have the weakness, and then black can just basically slowly gang up on it, come up here and slide the other rook over, and then we're in big time problem at that point. So you have to always think to yourself, do you want, even though it's doubled, do you want to relieve such a do you want to have a weak position? You got to always ask those questions. Don't just always trade. That's what we're learning, is a to d8. Oops. What did I? A d8 right here. I think the idea is to come over here, potentially come there, maybe come here, have the rook come over there, and then slide up. I don't know, that's kind of an awkward move. And then e4. Oh, I see why it opened. They saw that e4 was coming. D takes, bishop takes. Black's backward, white's backward d pawn gains space, but due to the reduced material and absent of the knight, the light squared bishop, which will soon come off the board. Black enjoys more than enough room to maneuver, since white has no targets to attack, while black can basically pound the d4 pawn. Black could just pound that d4 pawn with his rook and queen and dark squared bishop. It's clear that black completely is in charge in this move here. So wow, rook a d8 actually put black in charge. You gotta always look for those subtle moves. Okay, let me see here. Rook d5. Surprisingly, the bishop can't take the rook, by the way. Because of course if you see the bishop takes rook, the queen falls off the end of the world. White threatens to rid himself of the backward pawn by playing d5, so black freezes it in place. That's a good thematic thing to do, but I would have preferred the less flashy bishop takes, queen takes, then d5 with this simple, similar to the actual game. The reason for this will be seen in our next notes here. So what Jeremy Sohn was talking about after this, bishop takes, queen takes, and this is more precise. You know, there's like precise minute moves. This doesn't have as much of a I want to say headache as the other ones do. You have to be really careful move order combination. It may look flashy, like cool, I could play rook d5. You can't take it, but you have to always be on guard of what potentially could happen. You never want to set yourself up for a fall. Like bishop takes. Oops. Let me see. D4. B4 is what was played. So bishop takes f5. So let's see, white should have given bishop takes, since e takes f5 gives counterplay down the e file. If rook takes, this is actually a double question mark blunder, and then d5. And queen g6. Sometimes these positions are really interesting. How the move sequences work out. A moment ago, black was actually in charge, and now white was able to relieve themselves of such a problematic situation, and now potentially it's equal. That's crazy. How it could go from an equal position, I mean from a one position from one side to equal by just a flashy move. So has allowed the weak pawn to turn into a monster pawn. That's what we just talked about. And also note that the bishop, which was such a poor, purely defensive piece, suddenly after rook takes and d5 enjoys new life with the open a1 to h8 diagonal. So would have then bishop queen takes f5 is, at this point queen takes f5 is a forced move order, but this allows the exchange of the queens, and which in turn lets white safely use his king to give extra support to the position, the d pawn. Rook takes, G3, rook D8, G2, and we're coming up the king's coming up the board. Rook D7, rook F2, rook F, D5, rook D2, bishop D8, rook E5, bishop F6, rook takes, king F3, and when white is actually okay, the king will get to E4, defend, and basically will end up a draw. So B4 was actually an inaccurate move continuation. G6 was played here. Both white and black seem to have decided that bishop takes F5 isn't anything to worry about, though I feel it's white's best chance. So I wouldn't bring the possibility up again. I won't bring the possibility up again. So he just talked about it. This was his best chance of taking. Queen G7, rook queen to D2, bishop takes, rook F D8, and rook F3 here, and then king G2, bishop D8. Now this was a vital move. This is an exclam. Black will bring everything possible to bear on the D4 target here. Then he'll be well-timed G6 to G5 will be played at a certain point and create a new target. In general, a player can hold when only one point is being attacked, but if you add another weakness to his or her position, and then the added defense burden proves to be too much. The added ability for them trying to defend is way too much for your opponent to hold, and eventually, under the weight of all the attack, the position will start crumbling. So rook E5. Oops. Just trying to quickly trade off one of these rooks before black gets into some big problems. Bishop F6 takes. So one pair of rooks come off the board. It takes, and then rook D3. And maybe the king can get involved. Maybe. Queen F8, Queen E2, Queen D8, Queen E4, Queen D7, Rook D2, King F8, Queen E3, Bishop G7, King F1, and then G5 exclam. In comes the second weakness right here. Excellent. Exclam. Black plays to create a second pawn weakness and or weaken white's king a bit. White can, of course, chop off the G pawn with F takes G, H takes G. But then the typical isolated pawn, we make use of the pin on this. So now the isolated pawn is there. We talked about how now it's not a fun position at this point. Typical isolated, okay. White would always have to make sure that this move here can't be played. Remember our formula that we talked about? That eventually once this comes off the board and that comes off the board, the queen and rook formula here and then e5, it's just way too much for the other side to handle. So g5, queen e4. This was actually a mistake on White's side of the board. A serious mistake after which White's position goes from suddenly worse to certainly miserable, to basically on the verge of defeat. White would have calmly held with the move king g1 or f takes g5 would have been holdable, but this move, no, we don't want that. G takes f, G takes f. Queen takes f4 is also a mistake here. This is a double question mark blunder, because rook to f5 at this point, and the queen is gone. Black actually plays surprisingly a blunder, not a blunder but a mistake. That's a mistake right back. Missing the tactical motif of e5 exclam. This just blasts the position open, because wins a pawn, since if you take here, the bishop comes smashing in, and if you take here, takes, and I'm thinking, let's see how many pawns. That's 5 to, oh, I guess it's equal. What is the best move? Oh, okay. Check. Ah, that's the reason. Okay, I totally missed that. This actually picks up a piece, so when the king moves, there it goes. Yeah, f5, mistake. Okay, king e2, queen d8. This is a longer game, 97. Black still wins, and White's position was extremely difficult. The rest of the game features the Blacks pieces slowly but surely making their way deeper and deeper into the enemy position. So we'll go through it really quick without much talk, so that we can get to the so you can watch and see how basically they win. h5, king e2. This is beautiful. Yeah, this is beautiful how you're getting to watch a beautiful end game. Oops, I think I had e5 wrong. Kind of a Lucinda position. Just want to make sure I didn't. Make sure on 88. I just want to make sure I have this right. Okay, just give me a second. Oh, I get it. It was rook b1. Yeah, this move loses to a Lucinda type of position. And then eventually what'll happen is you'll come here again, and after the check he'll come here, and then after that he'll push this pawn, and you'll get into where the build the bridge happens. It's a Lucinda, and Lucinda wins. And that's, he's trying to set up a Philindor's position, which is in Jeremy Silman's endgame. And so we'll have to go over that a little later. It's always fun to go over what we priorly have done. King c2, rook a1, rook e6. And if you were thinking about this here, there's that. And then what we can always do is just, if the king comes up, we just come up here, and we get the same exact idea of pushing, and with the same sitch. So at this point, e6, king f3, c4, and the game that white resigned at this point. There's no more reason to go on, and we'll call it here. We'll pick up, we'll continue with our next game, and then after the game that we go over, we'll be in a new section here. Yeah, we'll get into our double pawns, because then we can set up. So what we learned is our anti-knight position is we got to see that played in one of the games. We got to see where our isolated pawn setup is. You would want to trade down into like a queen, even though there's an isolated pawn, and not two rooks. I think we have an example of one. Let me see right here. I think this is, nope, it's this one here. This is the optimum position for white or black. If white's the one with the position on d4, and black has the inverse of it, this is the position you want for white. The rook on d4, the queen on d2. Very similar. It doesn't have to be exactly, but this is the structure you want. You want a queen here, rook here, bishop here, and you want to have the ability to break. But if you trade off a rook for a rook, then there's really no way for you to target the isolated d-pawn. And what could happen too, if you trade queens off thinking, yes, I got this, there's also potential for black's king or white's king to come to the defense of the pawn too, and then it will most likely go to a draw. So just remember this here. And then we have a game, I think, that we just priorly went over that talked about how to take advantage of backward pawns. Like if there was a black pawn here, that it would make this f2 pawn backward. And what happens is you kind of do the same exact setup that you would formation against an isolated pawn against a backward pawn. You want to gang up on it, and like in this formation, and then attack it with all your might, and just bring down all the archers and every type of weapon you have on that pawn. Okay, I think we've gone over that, so I will say adieu for tonight. I want to thank you all for logging on, participating. Sometimes these are a little bit longer, like we have to read and do a little bit of understanding. See, you have, one sec, we're not done, we're not wrapping up, we haven't wrapped up yet. And so I want to say one more thing. I apologize about this. What we have to do is remember that it's not always about just going over games. There's concepts, understanding, and principles that you have to lay out that will help you when you get to end games. When you see weaknesses, target consciousness, those type of setups. And we'll end there. Okay. Again, thank you for logging on and participating. And you know what? Keep pushing forward. Remember what Bruce Lee says. Take what you know and be willing to do something with it. Never settle for second best, but always go for number one. Remember what the buds say. They say in SEALs that second place is first loser. But if your best is a draw, and you both play the optimum moves, then that's a win. That's what my teacher told me. So never think that a draw isn't a win. If you both play good, you can't but have a draw. So don't worry about it. Don't feel bad. Remember, there's a new game ahead. Play that game after that one. Don't dwell in the past. And well, we have to remember that, you know what? A very important decision that we all have to make is, whom will we serve this day? Will we serve the Lord Jesus Christ and receive Him as Lord and Savior, or will we serve ourselves? So we have to always keep that in our forefront. Whom will we serve? Just remember that. And I pray that you do receive Him as Lord and Savior. And I want to tell you that the Team Chess Cruncher model applies to how we study. We hang up our coats, we hang up our hats, we sit down and study when most won't. Team Chess Cruncher does. That makes all the difference. And as Wesley So says, serve the Lord Jesus. As I say, God bless, and I'll see you next time on Chess Cruncher TV. Have a blessed morning, afternoon, and evening. Lord willing, I'll be back on tomorrow. We'll keep pushing forward, improving, and getting better. And just remember that, every day is a victory when you study. Okay? So keep it up and keep studying. More study than play. Okay? I'll see you. Bye-bye, Team Chess Cruncher. And I think I forgot one thing. Remember what Hannibal Smith said, even inside of a random position. There's always a plan. And when you find it, you get to say, I love it when a plan comes together. Okay, bye-bye, team.